My father accepted their offer to come to Canada, and he went back to India, married my mother, and then they came to Canada. And the Indian Pakistani background that I come from, what they do is so they set up Muslim organizations very early on in the early 80s, 81 I think it was. And one of the first things we did, or they did, was set up a Deobandi. So Deoband is a city in India, and there is a large seminary, Islamic seminary in Deoband, which has produced three lines of, we'll say, three manifestations of Islamic practice. One is the madrasa system itself, that seminary type system. The second is what they call the Tablighi Jamaat. Tabligh Jamaat is an apolitical, albeit conservative, uh, evangelical type movement, which proselytizes to Muslims only. Basically, their whole mentality is we're not going to try to convert people to Islam when the Muslims themselves are not on point. So let's get the Muslims on point first, and other people can worry about converting others later. And the third is a Sufi line. So the Chistis, for example, the Chisti, Sheikh Chisti was an Indian a Sufi scholar, and there's a Chisti line, a Soharwardi line. So these are the three manifestations of that. So when I was a boy, young boy, 5 years old, I went to what I verbalize as a Quran school, but it was really a carbon copy of the madrasas that you see on TV, that stereotype of boys on wooden benches, rocking back and forth, reading the Quran, and not
Rote learning, right? Hafiz, you just memorize.
exact. You can't. You're not even. You don't know a word of Arabic. You're like a parrot, right? So that's what I did in the evening time, 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. Juxtapose that with public school by daytime, secular public school. It was a complete opposite of what I experienced in the madrasa. It was a caring, nurturing environment. Boys and girls were mixing. And this would lay the foundation for an identity crisis, which would manifest later on in my life. My father was not so strict. I mean, there's a saying, you can take the Indian out of India, but you can't take the India out of the Indian. So he had some conservative values, but overall, I think because of his upbringing in the UK, he was sufficiently liberalized. And when I got to public school, when I got to middle school, high school, I was now finished with the Quran school. I wasn't bullied. I wasn't picked on. We were actually the cool kids in high school. It was so cliche, the cheerleaders were our friends, and the sportos or the jocks,
Well, why?
they.
Because you have an exoticism about you. Is it that you're
No, no,
exotic and
not
you're
just me. It was the group that I was a part
okay?
of.
I see.
Yeah, we were just cool. I mean, so but in that high school, so I want to really lay this because the peer groups that I was a part of, they came with their own value system. They came with their own expectations of conduct. Um, all of them were non-Muslim, overwhelmingly non-Muslim. I don't think I think I might have had two or three Muslim friends at high school, but I still had this Muslim community that was outside of that school. And at the same time, I had joined the Army Cadets in high school. So I was 13 years old. The Army Cadets is basically it's like a cadet training program for kids really, and that also came with a different value system or an additional value system, expectations of conduct, normalization into a particular, shall we say, militant mindset. So at the age of 18, or actually I was 17, I had a house party, and it was a rocking house party. My parents were out of town, and my father had told my uncle to check on the house while he was gone. So in the middle of the party, I happened to be standing outside with a friend of mine, and my uncle walks in and crashes the house party. Now, my uncle is the epitome of the stereotypical, angry or mad Muslim. Okay, There's a guy that if you search Muslim Rage Boy,
Okay.
there's a guy who's like his face is all contorted. He's got the beard. He's at some kind of rally, and this is what my uncle
Is
is
that
like.
is that driven by his religiosity or just that's his personhood? He's an angry guy.
Sometimes the two match up real
Right.
nice.
Right.
Sometimes it's difficult to determine what it is exactly, if it's the ideology or the personality. So he's got the hat, the beard, the robes. He comes in. There's boys and girls. People are smoking weed, drinking beer, and he loses it. And for me, my world started to crash. I had now defiled the home. I had dishonored the family. Like my uncle said, people pray in this house. You bring these people here. These kuffar, these
I was
infidels.
gonna say kufar, but
Yeah,
I don't want to insult you, but okay.
yeah. No, no, it wouldn't be an insult. This
Yeah.
is. I mean, we'll
Yeah.
talk about this.
Yeah.
This is a. It's like a. It's. I want to call them Muslim supremacists. They're
Right.
like white supremacists who call derogatory terms for non-Muslims. So he loses it. He tells me, I've done all these bad things. He's phoning my relatives, the other uncles, because they got to gang up on you, of course. So a 17-year-old kid, seeing what's happening, I start to panic in my head psychologically, and I tell myself, look, the only way, or I ask myself, how can I fix this? And I look into my cultural experience, and I see that, well, I know of other people who were screw ups, but who went with this Tabligh Jamaat group, and became religious, and suddenly people respected them again, and everything was okay. So I convinced myself through a combination of conditioning, if you will, cultural conditioning, meaning that my frames of reference would only go to a particular kind of or particular answers in trying to solve my issue, but shame, guilt, and I decided I would go with this Tabligh Jamaat to what they have is a 4-month program in India and Pakistan. So you pay your own way, you stay in the mosque, you basically tell the local community, hey, look, there's this group here, the Jamaat has come from wherever. We're going to have some lectures in the mosque, some programs. Please come. And it's completely apolitical. So I've seen them in Israel. In fact, I've seen them all over the world because they don't talk politics. So
Before you go on, just for people to know that before we started, you asked where I was from, and when I told you where I was from, you broke out into a very beautiful Jewish prayer. So
oh yes,
let this be in the record that
absolutely.
Mubin Sheikh can pray in Hebrew. Well done. Go on.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O
Amen.
Israel, the Lord our God is one God.
Very nice.
So, actually, when you told me you were coming from a Jewish background, that's it. I said I can't have this conversation
Yeah.
now.
I'm
So,
smelling a fatwa on me.
in 1995 May, I go with the Tablighi Jamaat. I spent 2 months in India, and I spent time at Deoband itself, the seminary, for 40 days, and 2 months in Pakistan. Now, in Pakistan, what they do is, they deploy you, if you will, to particular areas. And in Pakistan, I spent some time in Lahore, then Faisalabad, and then they sent me to a city called Quetta, Quetta. Now, Quetta at the time was a Taliban stronghold, and it still largely is. And I didn't know that in the mosque that we were staying, I had seen other people. They were sitting in a similar gathering, so I actually thought they were other Jamaats that were there, other groups from the Tablighi Jamaat in the mosque. And one of the things we did when we went outside and trying to talk to the local community, that we're here from Canada. This is the first student group that's come from Canada, and so please come to the mosque, blah blah blah. And so as I was walking around the area, now understand, this is a guy who he's come. Okay, I don't want to refer to myself in the third person. I've come from this background, all these different value systems, the army cadets. I'm accustomed to being around weapons actually, and that military context, and adventurous, and outgoing. And so we started to walk about the local area. And I could see where we were is there was a compound where a lot of foliage was growing out of, from the walls and over the walls. So as I came, I could see some guys sitting and they had beards and turbans and robes. And so I thought, oh, these are, religious guys. Let me go and talk to them. As I came closer, it turns out they were armed, heavily armed, rocket propelled grenades, AK-47s, other kinds of firearms. And the fixer that we were with, I could tell he started to get nervous. And so I came up to them and I gave them the spiel. I said, look, in order for us to be successful in this life and the next life, we have to follow the commandments of Allah as shown by the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they said, okay, it's very nice. But if you want to change the world, you do it with this. And he held up his AK-47. And I thought then, what a statement to make, and they became very intrigued. What is this Jamaat from Canada you're talking about? There's Muslims like you in Canada? I said, yeah, there are many Muslims in Canada. And remember, these are Taliban guys who have not left their little
You're
patch
speaking
of.
which language? What common language?
So I was speaking in Urdu, and
Okay.
the fixer was either Dari or Pashto. I don't know
Okay.
what, but I think it's Pashto that has many similar words in Urdu. So they said to me, look, we are fighting for jihad and against the kuffar. And this is our way. This is the way in which you will bring greatness back to the Islamic world. And I became enamored by them. For me, they manifested all the things that I was looking for. They had the militant or military construct. They had the religious element as well. So in the fall of 95, September, I returned back to Canada, and my birthday is September 29.
Happy
Uh,
belated birthday.
thank you very much. I just turned 41, I think it is.
You don't look
Uh,
it. You look like one
yeah,
of my undergraduate students.
great, great. And so I turned 19 then. But what happened is I left the Tablighi Jamaat, and I joined up with guys that I had known previously, but for at that time, the previous time, their messaging didn't really resonate with me. I didn't grow up in a home where we were talking about politics. My grandfather was actually a police officer under the British in India. He did undercover operations, and so my father grew up in that environment, and politics and this kind of stuff really wasn't our thing. So now I've taken on this new identity. Now I'm seeking a new group with
Is your
which.
family surprised, or are they aware of this change in your belief systems, if we can call it that, or you kept this to yourself?
No, no, it was pretty obvious. I
Okay.
started to grow the
Oh, okay.
beard. I had I don't know if you've seen a picture of me from before, but
I saw a clip of you of 10 years ago, and you look differently from now.
well, yeah, there's one where like I have the big beard, black turban, long robes. I look like I was like, 10 years older probably. Uh, so I joined up with a group of young guys in Toronto that I've known about, and they're basically jihadi Salafis. Now, just it's terms, and I don't want people to get confused. So basically, the Salafi is sometimes it's used synonymously with Wahhabi. It comes from the Abdul Wahhab, who was the founder of this if you want to call it school of thought. I guess it is a kind of a school of thought. It's a thoughtless school of thought, but we'll get to that. And it starts in the late 1800s, or I think it's late 1700s is when Abdul Wahhab is born. Abdul Wahhab basically joins up with Ibn Saud, and that marriage creates what we now know as Saudi Arabia. So Ibn Saud validates Wahhab, Abdul Wahhab, and his school of law or school of thought, and Abdul Wahhab validates the Saudis as the legitimate rulers. So they were really it's a really separationist worldview. It harkens back to really Bedouin culture, this idea that we need to go back to the ways of the Prophet, meaning replicate, seventh century Arabia, and we'll get into the vast number of problems that's caused, not just in the theological sense, but also in the socio-political sense. So I joined up with these guys, and they're all about the global jihadi cause or the global jihadi culture. And I use that term global jihadi culture because things like Taliban, Al Qaeda, ISIS, they are all just manifestations of that general jihadi culture. So I join up with them. It's angry young men, very anti-Western, and the idea that you need to be a mujahid, as you need to take on the mujahid identity. The world is at war with Islam. They really believe in this perpetual state of war. I'm sure we'll get into, these ancient constructs of
Dar al Harb.
Dar al-Harb, right? Dar al-Harb. It's a house of war, Dar al-Salam, house of peace, if those are the only two people want to use. But a very bad way of living and thinking. So I was with them for a long time. I recruited other young people to that cause. Um, and in 1998, so I do that for about 2.5 years. 1998, I get married. I actually marry a girl I knew from high school. She's Polish. She converts to Islam, and I knew her from before. And in fact, she knew me from before when I was the party guy. And then I left, and I came back like hyper religious, and that intrigued her. And that was the exotic, I think, maybe component. And so we get married, and that's the same year that this guy named Osama bin Laden comes out with his fatwa against, well, he's not qualified to give fatwas, but his fatwa, his declaration, his so-called legal opinion that we need to make war with the West. So we became supporters of the Taliban and then Al Qaeda. But juxtaposing this with my marriage, this calmed me down a little bit. I didn't tell my wife what I was up to and the kinds of ideas I had because I probably thought, rightfully so, she would flee very quickly. Um, and after I got married, the last 10 days of the fasting month, I spent in Saudi. I went to Medina and Mecca. I went to Egypt. I did the tourist thing in Egypt. From Egypt, we took a bus from the Cairo Sheraton to through the Rafah border in Israel and went into Jerusalem. And I had a fantastic experience in Jerusalem.
Now,
Not
is that when you realize that if you look closely at Jews, they don't actually have the shaitan's horn on their foreheads?
Yeah, yeah. It was I'll give you some examples. So remember, I still looked the part, and this is before 9/11. So the Israelis aren't really. I mean, I have an Arab name, all right, Mubin Shaikh, but I don't have Arab family, and that's their concern. It was like, or are you Arab? Do you have family from here, from there? I was like, no, I'm Indian. They're like, how do you have an Arab name? I was like, I don't know. It's just my parents gave it to me. So and the experience in Jerusalem was so deep and fulfilling. Um, my wife and I climbed Masada. Masada is the fortress where I guess it was initially used as a Roman fortress, and then a group of Israelites or Jews took it over. Not took it over, but started to use it. The Romans seized or laid siege on it. And in the end, there's a whole story where one had to basically, it was like a murder, not, I guess it was like a suicide pact because then I can understand it. They didn't want to be taken as slaves and raped and murdered. But to watch the sun rise from Masada and contemplating on these things really started to really create a big wedge in my head, a cognitive wedge.
That transcendence that you felt, was it very coalitional based? It's making me stronger in my Islamic identity, or is it creating a universal brotherhood because you are sitting there where Jews did this, you are sitting in Israel. So, which of the two was being awakened
Yeah.
in you?
It's a good question. It's a good question because psychologically sometimes people will just double down if they're under threat from their ideas are under threat, they'll double down. No, I went the other way. I started to see, wait a second, this is like I really felt a profound sense of I don't know what it was. I mean, it's the Jerusalem syndrome, sometimes people get. And also, I went to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and Canadian passport. Nobody bothered me. I was allowed to go right to the back, and I stayed in the back. I didn't want there to be any issues. I could see a couple of Israeli soldiers positioning themselves just in
The,
case.
the, the trigger finger was getting a bit itchy.
No, they were fine. I mean, I'm sure they understood. I went to the back. I mean, a guy who's there to do anything crazy, he's not going to go to the back. He'll probably try to do something up there. So it was things like that. I was studying Christianity, but for the wrong reasons, I'll admit. It was to debate Christians. It was to destroy their faith by showing contradictions in the Quran. And there I am outside the Garden of Gethsemane, for example, with a Bible and reading the accounts in the Bible. And when we went inside, it just so happened that there were some Polish tourists who were there. And my wife, she's Polish, she understands Polish. And they said, quick, take a picture of him. He looks like those guys who used to live here in those days. And my wife was laughing. She's like, hey, they think you're like one of the disciples, so it was a really, really positive experience that I had there. Then I actually ended up going to India, did the tourist thing there, went to the Taj Mahal and, went to some Hindu temples, Jain temples. And I was always intellectually driven, I think. If I can say, I think that's one of the key things that kept me from fully engaging in violence, to be always thoughtful about things, or at least try to be. And this really started to open my mind. But this is how the de-radicalization process happens. Just like radicalization, there are always points along the journey. And something usually will happen in your life, and you will then reinterpret those events according to your cognitive frame.
Now, what is
So
it?
now,
Sorry, before you go on, what is
yeah.
it that allows you to have such self insight? Because I mean, your story. I mean, right here is your uncle that comes in, bursts in. He's the angry Muslim, as you said. And yes, I know that that's not how it's properly pronounced. I'm Lebanese, and we would say Muslim, but okay, it doesn't matter. Because someone writes to me once in a while and says that's not how you should say it. So somebody is, some white guy from Iowa is explaining to me how to pronounce the word Muslim. But okay, anyways, but that notwithstanding, so you have very clear points that you seem to have access to that say here is the trigger point that got me to go down that first path. Then here's now why aren't other people as clear in that process? Is it just because of your unique personhood that allows you to introspect and come up with these points? How do you explain this?
Yeah, I no, all of this is a product of later on when I began to study the topic of radicalization and
Yeah,
even just basic psychology. I was not as insightful and thoughtful before. Before I was just going with the flow.
right.
And I'll add to that point a little bit more. I want to continue with the story here. So 1998, and there are points along the way, and this is a major point along my way out, I think. A few years later, 9/11 happens. And I'll be honest, it was Tuesday morning. I'll never forget it. I was driving to work. I was working for a real terrorist organization, student loans. It was customer service for student loans. And they
Financial jihad.
financial jihad al-mal, right?
Jihad al-mal,
Right.
مظبوط. Yeah,
So, and they processed the documents and contact schools, and it was a decent thing. But you couldn't see what I looked like on the other end of the phone, obviously. But when I was driving down, it was just before 9 o'clock. I heard a plane had hit the building, and the first words out of my mouth was Allahu Akbar. Okay,
wow.
I thought it was an accident in the beginning, actually, because one plane hits. I mean, nobody thought. Well, I mean, some people did, but most people wouldn't think it's a deliberate attack. And then when the day went on and we realized, oh my God, this is a major attack. And I went home during lunch and my wife is like watching the TV and she even made the joke, like she's like, you sure you don't have anything to do with this? Because like people are phoning the house because they knew what I was about, right? And so my good Muslims are calling me saying, Mubin, this is not our religion, this is not what we're about. My non-Muslim friends are calling me saying, Mubin, is this your religion? Is this what you're about? Is this what you've become? So that day, I was now challenged from all sides to really answer to myself, what is it that I'm subscribing to? Is this really what? So at the end of it, I mean, even at the end of the day, I went to see my bad friends, and they were ecstatic. They were very happy. You can say they were celebrating. And one of my friends actually said, "Yeah, but these are non-combatants. What do they have to do with our fight?" And there was this silence for a few seconds. And that I can say is the moment when I realized, no, these guys are not, there's something fundamentally wrong with this worldview. I need to study my religion properly because I come from that background where I didn't study Arabic. I didn't study usul, like principles of jurisprudence or interpretation, tafsir, like exegesis. I had not studied any of that stuff. The seerah, which is the biographical material of the Prophet, the hadith, which is the oral slash written tradition. So now I said I need to study my religion. Where am I going to go to do that? So I thought, okay, I must go to our Arab country. Now I thought of Egypt, but at the time Egypt was too expensive. I was studying religious studies by distance education through the University of Waterloo, and I was not going to get into Saudi Arabia with a book called The Jewish Jesus. Okay. So it just so happened that the mosque that my father actually runs the mosque, he's on the board of directors. There were some laborers who were building, the dome that we have, and they were from Syria. And they heard that I wanted to go and study. So one of them said, "Hey, I have a house in Syria that's not being used. Why don't you go and live there and stay there for free? Don't worry. You're a student of knowledge." So I said, "Oh, I guess I'm going to Syria." Now, Syria also plays a huge role in the Islamic apocalyptic or eschatological tradition, the end times. This is really what explains why so many have gone to Syria or are desiring to go to Syria. More people have gone in a few years to Syria than in the 10 years they went to Afghanistan with the jihad there. So I also thought I'm going to go there. Okay, if the Great War happens while I'm there, great. I'll be able to participate. So I go there in early 2002. Now, a number of things happen while I'm there, and I'll list them very quickly. The biggest thing is the most important thing was that I came into the school where Sufis were teaching. So for those who don't know, Sufis are really like the polar opposite of Salafis we talked about earlier. Salafis basically you can say or the outward legalistic literalistic people versus the Sufis who are more internal, don't miss the forest for the trees. Big picture. I don't have time to look at other people and say, "Hey, you're not doing A, B, and C," because I know that I haven't done, D, E, and F. So I'm not gonna waste my time with that guy because God's not gonna
But
ask me about that
the
guy.
former are going to consider the latter as
Yeah,
apostates, right?
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Apostates, deviants, they call us all sorts of names, right? So the Sufi scholar who was there really corrected my understanding. He said to me, because I wore glasses at the time, I got laser surgery 3 years ago. Great decision. And he said to me, "We're going to give you new glasses by which to look at the world." He could see that there is a cognitive framing, if you will. And so we went through the Quran. He told me, he goes, "Give me your ideas. Where are they from? What are the verses that you refer to?" And so we went through the verses, the arguments that are used, and the way that he did it. He was kind. Uh, his knowledge was like, I mean, off the charts. This guy had, I mean, not only memorized but internalized so many of the Islamic texts, and basically showed me that my interpretations were all wrong. And I felt a sense of failure in that I had wasted my life or years of my life thinking like this and being like this, and all the while, what was I doing? Like the Sheikh said to me, he says, "Ask yourself a simple question. By your conduct, forget your words. If by your conduct you are repelling people from God, then you are not a person of God." Okay, you can talk all you want. People talk very nice, but behaviors. How was your behavior? Do you help the random person, the random poor person? God doesn't say you can't help the non-Muslim poor person. He just says help the poor. There's no distinction made. So So the main thing was a reframing, and this I take this from social work. Social work has this reframing, so you start to think of the world in a new way. Um, Number two, I became very disillusioned by life in Syria. I mean, I saw a real police state, a real police state. To nowadays we use this term in the West because I am very pro national security agencies, not blindly. I mean, I believe in oversight and ethical conduct and all that, but largely, I mean, we have the best system around. I mean, that's the reality. So a real police state in Syria. People were calling me Taliban more in Syria than they did ever in
Mhm.
Canada, right? Because an Indian guy in an Arab country
So more
with
is more Islamophobia in Syria than in
yeah, right,
Toronto.
right,
Right.
right. That's
Yeah.
good. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Also, while I was there, a couple of British students, British nationals, Indo-Pak background, went to through the Golan Heights with their passport up to Tel Aviv, and one blew himself up in Mike's Place bombing in 2003. It was. The other guy, don't know what happened. He tried to detonate and he didn't work. I guess I don't know if he tried to swim away, but he basically washed ashore on a Tel Aviv beach. Also in 2003, the American invasion happened of Iraq, and the Assad regime was sending people from Syria to fight in Iraq. Now, my son, now I'm married, of course, I have two children by this time. My oldest son, his name is Mujahid, right? One who does jihad. But actually, because I was so infatuated with the Judeo Christian tradition, his Mujahid Yahya. So Yahya is John, John the Baptist. And then my second boy, his Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him. So people, they said Abu Mujahid, because you're now father of
Right.
Mujahid. They said, come, come. And so I was like, look, I'm not here for that. I registered with the embassy, Canadian embassy, when I was in Syria. So I was there for the exact reasons I said I was there. So all these things taken together, largely the first thing, that theological context, is how I de-radicalized. There was a full cognitive shift. Um, so I returned to Canada in 2004. The first week that I'm back, the first Canadian's been arrested on terrorism charges, Momin Khawaja. Momin Khawaja sat next to me in the Quran school that I went to as a kid. So I contact the intelligence service. They basically say, well, they recruit me. I start to work for them undercover for 2 years. One of those cases becomes a public prosecution. I then traverse to the RCMP. In 2006, 18 guys get arrested on terrorism charges in the Toronto 18 case. And then for the next 4 years, I'm in court giving testimony. But while I'm in court, I start to do a master's degree in policing, intelligence, and counterterrorism. This is where I start to discover radicalization and de-radicalization. And I realize, hey, wait a second, I've actually done all this stuff. So, so 2010, the court case is over. I get online, Twitter, Facebook. I discover, the war in Syria is happening. This group called ISIS. These kids, foreigners who want to go and join ISIS in Syria. So for 2012, 2013, 2014, and too much of 2015, almost every day I was online with a lot of these ISIS youth in real time. I got a lot of screenshots from my interactions with them. What they claim they're doing, what I can,
Infer.
extract from their
Yeah.
life, why they're really doing it. Because sometimes, and I'll say this now, religion is sometimes a driver,
Right.
but other times it's a passenger with other psychosocial factors as the driver. There's that interplay between ideology and foreign policy or grievances. So, ideology without grievances doesn't resonate, and grievances without ideology are not acted on.
But
Okay.
can I push you for the first time in nearly 35 minutes of
Sure, sure,
uninterrupted
sure.
lecturing? Uh,
Sure, sure, sure. So
uh,
I'll just finish it with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
This
Okay,
is
go.
my online stuff, 2015, and since then I train government agencies, special forces units, academics, conferences and whatnot. So